Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love during an election. I'm Jennifer Grant, and I am really excited today to be talking with my sister-in-law, Sara Hendren, who is an author and a professor at Olin University College.
Olin College of Engineering.
Olin College of Engineering in the Boston area, and has a new book that's coming out tomorrow. A book that I was privileged to read some early chapters of and really loved it. And I'm so excited that you're here, Sara. So do you want to tell a little bit about you and your work?
Thank you for including me. It's really fun to be here. I am an artist and a writer and trained in the humanities, and I have found myself in an engineering school working on disability and design. So in between all those kind of fields. And specifically, I've been looking for the last 10 years at prosthetics and assistive technology and adaptive architecture and urban planning. And I've talked to so many people and met so many interesting folks doing their own design work, disabled people doing their own design work or making interesting collaborations, both in research spaces and in living rooms, high tech, low tech, all kinds of things. And I talk about all of those stories and also what those stories have to teach any of us in any body of any kind in a new book that is coming out tomorrow.
So talk about the book.
Yeah, thank you. So it's called What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World. And so the we is intentional there, that the we actually gathers all of us. And the book is really about two things. One is about design, but not in the kind of fancy mode of expertise that you might think of, like architects in cool glasses, just design in the very everyday sense of stuff that is in your household and your kitchen, to the furniture that you sit on every day, to the rooms in which you live your life, to the streets where you go day in and day out, all of that includes design, product of human intention. That's one thing. And the other thing it's about is the experience of disability, which on the one hand is really particular and dimensional, but is actually a universal fact and feature of all of our lives. And it looks and walks and talks like lots of different things. And the book is meant to invite the reader to see themselves in that, whether they would say they're somebody who lives with disability or is a disabled person, as a lot of the subjects in my book would describe themselves, or whether they're somebody who's just thinking about their body changing over the lifespan. So a body that ages, a pregnant body, a body dealing with chronic or difficult acute illness, a body caring for others who may be experiencing those same things. In other words, disability really is a universal experience of life for all of us. And if we can see that, then we can see in it that it both has deep creativity, because bodies meeting the world in a clash require that creativity, and also the deep urgency of a politics to make a world that's actually more accessible, because it really matters. You have to be able to get into the street, into the elevator, into the building in order to get to the job, to get to the school, to get to the voting booth. Like the space is the way you get to the public sphere and you become a kind of civic actor. So both those things are happening, and design is this incredibly resonant, vivid way that you see bodies in the world figuring out, how can I be here and be present too? So we meet people who, a man with one arm who designs a prosthesis for changing his newborn baby's diaper. But we also meet a man using the latest myoelectric, highly engineered, kind of cyborg arm that looks quite futuristic. And we look at those two stories together and say, one is not better or best, they're just doing different things for different people. What's really interesting is that each of these men has stuff to do, and each of these men has tools to do it with. So that's just in the kind of limb chapter, which is about, the stuff that's literally on our bodies, but we tour through highly bespoke cardboard chairs, but also the history of the Aeron chair that people may know, super high and sophisticated chair. We look at architecture for deafness. We look at a man who's with ALS who designed a whole living space for himself. We look at a village in the Netherlands that was built around the condition of dementia. So the book is structured in this kind of expanded way, starting on the body and then moving one scale out until we get to the public street. But really it's an invitation for any reader to say, where is my body in all of this? And where does it have needs, right? Visible or invisible? Temporary or permanent, and where then is the creative adaptation and urgency in my life? Will I bring my body to the built world, or can I ask the built world to come a little bit to my body? And disabled people have been asking that for so long in such interesting ways that if you look closely with your interest and your wonder intact, you can learn quite a lot no matter what body you're in.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait. I love that you visited the Netherlands. Where else did you go in the research piece of this book? I remember you traveled a lot.
Yeah, that's right. I went to Ahmedabad in Gujarat in India to look at the Jaipur foot, which is a low-tech lower limb prosthesis that's built and distributed for free all over India. It's fascinating. I did go to Scotland for a couple of stories that I ended up not including in the book, but saw a really interesting bakery that's run by adults with developmental disabilities there. And I went to Weesp in the Netherlands and also to Deventer in the Netherlands for a story about a nursing home that I didn't actually include, that's beautifully designed. And then in lots of places in the United States as well, and talked to folks in Ecuador, other places in the UK, profiled an Italian design writer. So it is a global kind of story, drops at these different scales. Yeah.
I think that's one of the elements that's so interesting with your book, is that it is an internet. It's not just looking at, this country and the Americans with Disabilities Act or any particular subculture. It's looking at, I loved the story of the Jaipur foot. Did I say that correctly? In India, and just to see how people with different resources are solving and addressing problems.
That's exactly right. The Jaipur foot is produced for probably $30. So it's a lower leg, calf, ankle, and foot. And it's built out of super sturdy plastics that hold up in conditions of moisture and take all kinds of wear. And that is the right kind of foot for a lot of people in the conditions of big, intense cities, and also rural manual laborers in India. So folks in India design that for a very particular kind of user with very particular kinds of conditions. And a lot of Americans with a kind of lab culture and expertise kind of disposition might think of that of the Jaipur foot as somehow less engineered than the thing that's happening at DARPA or the thing that's happening at MIT. But one of the many arguments I try to make in the book is that that high tech is not actually synonymous with impact, right? That Jaipur foot, which makes its lower leg limb, again, for $30 a pop, and has distributed 1.5 million now for free to anyone who needs them. It's the difference between unemployment and gainful employment for so many people. Landmine injuries, I mean, a total lifesaver. It is this incredibly clever, scaled object that is doing some of the most important work in prosthetics that you can imagine. So it's not just labs, and it's not just the cyborg future. That's a fantasy of imagination that I think people carry around, and then they lack then imagination for the much more sturdy rudimentary tools that are doing much more outsized work for people all over the world, right? And so it requires sort of rich Western folks to be thinking differently about ingenuity, about impact, about innovation. All those categories get scrambled.
And access, yeah, right.
Access, that's right.
Yeah. Now, did you in your research, and forgive me if there was something that I read that I should remember that you've done this on your blog or otherwise, but have you seen examples of interventions or designed prosthetics or other adaptive technologies that would be kind of the wrong-headed sense of that? Like, I know, like, somebody investing millions of dollars to develop this thing that should have been a more simple technology.
Yeah, certainly. I have seen a fair amount of frustration around what looks like an engineer's fantasy of a wheelchair that climbs stairs. It's got these kind of heavy, grippy, like tracks right around the wheels, and there's this kind of breathless, celebration of that. And most folks that you talk to who use wheelchairs are not interested in that so much, right? They need a world that actually doesn't depend on that machine doing all that work for them. They need a friendlier world built with ramps in it. That's a kind of collectivizing matter. Or I'm afraid every year there are well-meaning folks in labs, often students, who want to make better white navigational canes, for instance, that are or technologies that obviate, that would supersede the navigational cane. But if you talk to blind folks, the cane is doing all kinds of really elegant work just as it is. In other words, it taps, it senses, it picks up textures. It's also a public signal to people to make way sometimes, but also a blind person is not just using a cane as a hand, right? This is as a blind friend of mine told me, she's using her ears, her sense of smell, all kinds of proprioceptive, deeply adaptive tools in her body to get around. And so folks get very fixated, I think, on what's the next generation, super tricked out version of an old technology.
Haven't you called it like the gee whiz technology or?
Totally.
Yeah.
And no more gee whiz than me, but I think the engineers kind of go, because I work with them all the time, so I know it when I see it. They get excited about what can be built in a mechanical sense. And too little have they thought, who's actually asking for this, right? So, and the book is written in part to help people start to ask those questions. I'm really pleased because the book is going to be used in a lot of first year, like college first year classes, kind of big idea classes or foundational classes for engineers. So it's like, to me, that's the perfect place for it to drop in, where we go like, yes, be excited about the built world. Engineering, it's amazing. Start here though, right? Start with people, start with their needs, with their wishes, start with their habits, with their work, with their families, and then figure out what you can build together. And I think that's where engineering has gone wrong.
Yeah. So now tell me more about that, about the classes that this book will be used in. Because I could see it, of course, engineers will be interested and designers will be interested, but I could see it being used in other sorts of classes as well.
It's
Sociology, you know, like so many.
It's going to be used in a survey, a kind of humanities social science survey that's called the Big Idea, and this one at NYU, and that's for people. It will be focused around disability, but disability studies is this wonderful homeless kind of lens. So it doesn't belong any one place, and that's what it's its real strength. So my book and 3 or 4 others are going to be used at NYU for this big class of folks.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it would have been like what the big survey, class in history that you would have taken maybe 20 years ago, but it's called the Big Idea now. And I mean, you say that it makes sense that it would go to engineers, but it's actually highly unusual for engineers to have a required class in humanistic studies of technology. That's actually quite rare. So engineering majors, it's much more like, okay, here's your higher order math, here's your, kind of advanced biological sciences, and maybe you'll build a circuit, at the end. But, at Olin, where I teach, we have people building things with collaborators from their earliest days, but even my students don't get a lot of theory in the very rich and applied sense, right? Politics, context, dynamics of power, that stuff is so important. But you have to meet people where they are, and I wanted to write the book that's like, oh, just start here. It has stories in it, right? It has people you get to know. It's a way of welcoming you. I hope it's a way of welcoming you to thinking in a difficult manner, a challenging manner, but in a way that makes you go like, oh, I'm here too. Let's roll up our sleeves and do good work together. I've had to be a beginner at an engineering school, so I wrote a book presuming a kind of beginner's lens there. And my hope is that it's a kind of starter book for people from a number of different entry points. And it's a paper trail, of course, to scholars much more deep in this work than me, whether in engineering or design or in disability studies and history. So my big passion is to write the kind of translated, really 200 pages, kind of beginner gateway book that hopefully gets people excited about fields that have been so nourishing to me.
That's great. All right, so I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. And I can't wait to hold your book in my hands. It is ordered and I hope will be in my hands very soon. And thank you. And
thank you too. It's really a real pleasure. I'm so happy to see this kind of effort going out in such a year. We need it. It's hopeful.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, have a good afternoon.
Okay. You too.
Bye.